Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to those who are here in person. Thank you to the many people who are watching via Zoom. My name is David Balton, and I am a senior fellow here at the Belfer Center. It's my honor and privilege to moderate this event entitled Navigating Shifting Arctic Geopolitics, Perspectives from Iceland and Greenland. My job, other than to be the traffic cop, is to provide a little Arctic 101 at the top, and here you have it. From the end of the Cold War until pretty recently, the Arctic was a part of the world marked by a remarkable degree of international collaboration and cooperation. The nations of the Arctic, the peoples of the Arctic, and sometimes nations from outside the Arctic generally put aside their differences over other things in other parts of the world and focused on things they had in common. And they had a lot of work to do as the region is changing rapidly, many of the changes being driven by a quickly warming climate. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, coupled, I would say, with the advent of the second Trump administration here in the United States, have radically altered the geopolitics of the Arctic. Cooperation between Western Arctic countries and Russia has largely, though not entirely, ceased on the Arctic and elsewhere. And the United States no longer pursues policy aimed at mitigating the effects of climate change in the Arctic elsewhere. So against this geopolitical backdrop, Iceland and Greenland, two of the smaller players in the Arctic space, have been on their own extraordinary journeys. Those journeys are the focus of today's event. Iceland, a sovereign nation that achieved full independence from Greenland, from Denmark in 1944, has a population of roughly 400,000 people, and I spent a lot of time in Iceland over the years, and I can tell you it's a remarkable place. It's achieved nearly 100% renewable energy, boasts a 99% literacy rate, a pioneer in gender equality, high degree of political stability, and a lot of people there believe in elves. I've also been to Greenland a number of times, still a part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but has achieved a very significant degree of autonomy, political autonomy within the kingdom to manage its own affairs. Its population is just under 57,000 people. Many of those people support eventual independence from Denmark. And if you've been following the news, President Trump has repeatedly stated that the United States should acquire Greenland and has not ruled out the use of force to do so. Today, we're privileged to hear from two distinguished speakers, one from Iceland and one from Greenland, to offer their perspectives on these journeys. We have Halla Logadóttir. She is a founding member of the Arctic Initiative here in the Belfer Center, also a member of the Icelandic Parliament. Last year, she also ran for the presidency of Iceland. I should also mention that Halla teaches a J-term course here at the Harvard Kennedy School called Policy and Social Innovation for a Changing Arctic. There's some flyers down here. Pick one up on your way out. This is a great J-term course. Strongly encourage all of you to consider signing up for that. We also have Peder Kirkegaard, former Greenlandic diplomat, Fulbright scholar, visiting fellow here at the Arctic Initiative. He is currently pursuing a PhD at the University of Greenland, funded by the Danish Ministry of Defense. So we'll hear presentations from each of them. There'll be time for questions for you, including those of you online. Halla, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, David, and how lovely it is to see all of you. We weren't expecting so many. I can see the pizza attracts. Anyways, couple of things. I'm gonna kind of go through the big picture and then speak briefly about Iceland's journey and kind of reflect on our special relationship with Greenland. But as It's not. It's going to be only this slide. Let's see. Yeah. So my background is in energy. I was the Director General of our National Energy Authority in Iceland. So we deal with energy, the energy transition, minerals and water. And I'm working on some of these issues now in Parliament, trying to, make the legal changes that we need to do, also for the energy transition. Dave mentioned the course that he has been engaged in from the very beginning, but I want to say that if you haven't heard about, how many of you have heard about the Arctic Initiative before? Yes, it's a great crowd. So I want you to consider, the Arctic Initiative was founded to be a home of Arctic issues. It was founded to bring together all the different players to really work on solutions for this changing region. And there's so many projects that are taking place at the Arctic Initiative that I encourage you very much to be a part of. Great work that is being done there. When we started all this, the polar bear was at the center of Arctic issues in many ways. At least that's how people portrayed the Arctic. But as you know, since that was in 2016, a lot of things have happened. We have the Arctic being at the center of today's geopolitics. And just to give you, I'm not sure what your background is on Arctic issues, but just to give you kind of the overarching picture, it's really a region, we hardly look at the top of the globe. It covers a part of 8 different states. And it is very culturally vibrant, has many indigenous communities, and this is where Russia and the US are neighbors. Climate change is dramatically impacting the region, and just so you understand why that matters for the rest of the world, less ice in the Arctic has an impact on extreme weather events, both inside and outside the Arctic. It also, the land ice is increasing sea levels elsewhere on the planet, including here in the US. And then we have the economic development and the security issues. New shipping routes are opening up over the pole. And guess what? They're connecting Asia and Europe together in a completely new way. We have a whole new ocean opening up here. And that means that access to resources, oil and gas, minerals, all of this is becoming more accessible than before. But that also means that we have environmental challenges. With all of this comes the important questions on how to manage and make sure that we're picking the right policies that support environmental sustainability. And just to tell you, less ice in the Arctic has an impact on indigenous communities. Hunting, the walrus and the polar bear depend on the ice for hunting as well. So all of these things, from security over to, issues of everyday life for people, are intertwined and connected. All right, am I putting you to sleep?
Hardly.
Okay, good. So you might start, okay, is there any coordination? And as David mentioned, the Arctic Council had been kind of the center of all of this. It was the coordination body, a forum, bringing together the different states, indigenous communities, and many other players. And I think to understand where we are now in Arctic collaboration, we kind of need to go back in time. And that's why I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. Are you ready? And when you wake up, you are in Murmansk, you are in Russia, and you're listening to Mikhail Gorbachev. And he is saying these famous words. He's saying, let the north of the globe, the Arctic, become a zone of peace. Let the North Pole be a pole of peace. These were his words. And note, it's during the Cold War. And his words, among other things, led to the establishment of the International Arctic Science Committee. It encouraged science collaboration even during time of conflict. And the collaboration, amongst others, took off because there were different environmental events. There was a transboundary pollution related to Chernobyl. There was an oil spill as well in Alaska. And there was a sinking submarine. So the topic of environmental issues it served as a vehicle to bring countries together to focus on Arctic circumpolar collaboration. And in many ways, it was the least controversial area to actually build bridges during time of conflict. Then we had in '91 the Declaration on Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy. This was signed in Rovaniemi. Anyone knows what else is important in Rovaniemi? Santa Claus. There we go. Well, then we had the Ottawa Declaration that founded the Arctic Council, that has been the key vehicle with rotating chairmanships between the 8 Arctic states, and really developed to become kind of the coordination body. And keep this in mind, the Arctic Council had been nominated several times for the Nobel Peace Prize, because it was operating, during times of conflict, but also because it managed to kind of operate even though the countries, the Arctic states, had conflicts in other parts of the region, of the world. So it really managed to kind of keep its operation despite what other issues that were happening in the world. And I remember when we were working together, Iceland was the chairman. This is Blinken. This is during COVID. We had all the Arctic leaders. You can see Lavrov here, all the different foreign ministers. And guess what they were doing? They were agreeing on the first Arctic Council strategic plan on how to actually enhance circumpolar collaboration, because it is so important for all these different issues. And then Russia took over from Iceland. They also had this as a priority area to strengthen collaboration. But as was mentioned here, obviously Russia's invasion into Ukraine changed everything. Then the operation was put on hold by the other Arctic states. Then after Russia's time, the 2 years were over, the torch was passed to Norway, and now to Greenland, who's leading the operation on behalf of the Kingdom of Denmark. But during this time, what has been the case is that only the working groups are operating. It's kind of back to the basics, back to science collaboration, no political meetings. And I want to say for Greenland, as I look at it, it's really challenging time to lead the Arctic Council. It's the time of the war in Ukraine. It's the time of very shifting interest in the global geopolitics. So then we come to the question, like, how do smaller players like Iceland and Greenland, how do we navigate through this? And I want to take a few examples very briefly. There are other players that have been standing up, putting their efforts in. And you have players like the EU, to the local governments that obviously play a role in Arctic issues here. And then you have international platforms like the Arctic Circle Assembly that plays a big role, host dialogues. But I can tell you from a perspective, I sit on the Nordic Council, which is a body of parliamentarians from different Nordic states. I can see that there's much more focus because the Arctic Council is not operating as usually on Arctic issues, and it's being stretched into new areas like security as well. And an interesting development in that regard is that recently Greenland, the Faroe Islands that belong to Denmark, and the Åland Islands, they got, for the first time in history, fixed seats on the key committee that deals with governance in the Nordic Council. And now there are dialogues about changing the Helsinki Treaty, that is the foundation of the Nordic collaboration. And there may be some constitutional issues around that, but the good news is that the Faroe Islands just tested whether they could be an independent member of WTO, and they are allowed to do that according to courts. So it may very well be now that the Helsinki Treaty can be changed. That's being explored. Okay, then about the future. How do we move into this future? And then I will just say very briefly, I'm such a fan of Greenland. Have you been to Greenland, anyone? Yes. It's your next trip after Iceland, obviously. You do it both in the same tour. But Greenland has often taken their own path. Because of fisheries, they left the EU. This is before Brexit. They put reservations on the climate treaty they have now signed related to their economic development. And this fellow here, who used to be the premier, he has been focusing very much on e-fuels as a growth pattern for Greenland. But if you look at Iceland and Greenland's kind of future in the region, I think it's very interesting to compare their stories. You know, we're both countries that have strong ties to Denmark. We were a part of Denmark before. We're both countries that have had very close security issues with the US. Base in Greenland is there. It used to be in Iceland. And we both have played an important role in kind of security issues over time because of the Geopolitics gap, which is critical for marine traffic. And Iceland became independent when there was a security challenge in the world. It was when Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, then the US supported our independence. And it's interesting to follow now with the new security dimensions in Europe and wonder how will that impact Greenland's future and decisions in the world. And we often hear this. We used to hear this. Oh, you're such a boring line. You're too small. I can tell you when we got independent, we were 120,000. Greenland is like 57,000. And the opportunities are endless. We used to be extremely poor, just dependent on fisheries. Greenland is very similar. Fisheries are very important. Energy development was the key why we became a wealthy nation, attracting industry to us. And wow, does Greenland have incredible opportunities in that area, much more than Iceland, with mining and oil and gas even. We developed our tourist industry for being a hub between Europe and America. And the Greenland location offers the same. And with a new airport, this is going to be incredible to follow. So what will the future look like? I think there's a lot of moving pieces for Iceland and Greenland and for the world as a whole. But I think our small states will be aiming to punch above our weights in making sure that we develop in the right direction. Thank you.
Hi. So I only have this slide. And thank you, Halla. I have my notes on my phone, so I'm going to be looking at my phone if I can get it. Yes. And thank you, David, for your introduction. And I will take this opportunity to talk about some of the ways that Greenland is working to increase the engagement with international and multilateral organizations, and this is just some of them that I have on the screen. Because the current foreign defense and security strategy is literally called "Nothing About Us Without Us," which is something that the former premier, who's now Minister of Finance, he was the one who's talked a lot about nothing about us without us. So that's kind of his motto. What's the motto? No. When I was working as a diplomat, it was often my job to scold my counterparts in the Danish Ministry of Defense or in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because sometimes, a lot of times before, there would be events or meetings or something where the Greenland or the Arctic was discussed without Greenland being invited. Then it would be my job to call people up and, that's not cool, dude. And this is experiences that predates like the current strategy. This has been happening, and this is why Greenland got out of the European Union, why the home rule government movement started in the 70s. Because when Denmark voted to become a member of the EU, Greenland voted no. But because Greenland's no vote was part of the Danish voting system, it was only a small percentage. And then Greenland got out in 1985. And in my research, kind of looking at the history of Greenland, it is almost instantly, as soon as the Parliament of Greenland was created in 1979, where Greenland started to talk about international relations. So there is a history of Greenland and Greenlandic politicians and activists working to increase the right to represent the people of Greenland. The Inuit Circumpolar Council, which used to be Inuit Circumpolar Conference, also started with Greenlandic activists and together with activists in Alaska to talk about, the right to self-determination. So I'm going to highlight a few of these organizations from my own experience and from recent experiences. Greenland now has a seconded representative to the Danish representation at NATO. And the way I personally negotiated the agreement with the Ministry of Denmark to kind of figure out how do we actually make this happen. And the major thing for Greenlandic politicians was visibility for Greenland and also for Greenlandic representative to learn about how NATO works. Like looking at Iceland, Iceland is a full member of NATO, even though they don't have a military. They also contribute to a lot of things in the NATO cooperation. So we kind of look at how can Greenland do that. So it became, among more technical stuff, also my job to make sure that the representative from Greenland is that Greenland is visible at NATO. And the result is perhaps the longest title in NATO, even longer than the SACEUR. I have to read it because it's a long title. Council Representation of the Kingdom of Denmark to NATO, seconded by the government of Greenland. That's the official title of the person who goes to. Her name is Lida Skifte-Lennart. But in daily speech, it becomes Counselor at the NATO, seconded by government of Greenland. So only government of Greenland is mentioned in some of these meetings. So it's kind of, win for us, yay. But the win for Denmark was that the government of Greenland cannot directly give her instructions. That had to go to the government of Denmark. But that's, sometimes diplomacy is fun because it is very petty. Like the titles are long because Greenland is petty, and the title is long because Denmark didn't want representative of government of Greenland. That was my first suggestion, and then a month went by with angry emails. The other recent development which happened after I started my research is the Arctic ambassador position in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Denmark has, maintained how they choose ambassadors is apolitical, it is merit-based, it is, and has been a tool to kind of leave Greenlanders out of the system because they didn't hire enough Greenlanders for them to go up the ranks. Plus, Greenlandic diplomats would rather work in Greenland. So it became a political fight that the Arctic ambassadorship is a political choice, and Greenland should be part of that decision, with the result that the current historically, the Arctic ambassador of the kingdom has also been the senior Arctic official in the Arctic Council. And Greenland has been part of the work in the Arctic Council since its creation. And over all those times, the Arctic ambassador had never been from Greenland. But the current chair of the senior Arctic official and the Arctic ambassador is the former deputy minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Greenland, who was also the head of representation in the US, as Kenneth Hrund. But noteworthy is that he is not the senior Arctic official of the Kingdom of Denmark. He is the chair of the senior Arctic officials and the Arctic ambassador, because the senior Arctic official of the Kingdom of Denmark is Torsten Kjølbø Nielsen. And I know him. He's one of the guys I've yelled at on the phone. He's a Danish career diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he's been a diplomat for a long time. So he is the senior Arctic official of the Kingdom of Denmark, but Kenneth Hrund chairs the senior Arctic official. So, the pettiness continues, and there are still fights we need to do to kind of get the Greenlandic voice heard. And that was all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Let me try a question for each of them first, and then I'll open it to the audience, if that's okay. So one of the takeaways I had from your presentation was that you see that there might be some lessons to be learned for Greenland from Iceland's experiences if Greenland may be going on a course that Iceland has gone on before. Did I get that about right, or are there some significant differences such that the lessons may not apply one for one exactly?
Well, they're both similarities and differences, for sure. I think the similarities is, small nations that, are striving to find the way to diversify their economy. Because for Greenland, it's a question of economic independence as well from Denmark. And when we became independent, it was the question of, making sure that we could stand on our feet as well. And the opportunities that we pursued over a long period of time are the same opportunities that Greenland in many ways have. But I would argue that Greenland has many more opportunities, actually. What is challenging in the context of Greenland is, of course, you have distances. It's very difficult to travel between places in terms of costs and so forth. That also has impact on, if you look at the public sector, on healthcare and how you operate that in such a big country. But when I look at Greenland, which is just one of the most incredible places that I've been to, with the most incredible people, I just see, wow, there's so many opportunities in this special place. And I think Greenlanders and Icelanders, they're small guys, we stick together. So.
Okay, thank you. I have my own mic.
Oh,
Hans Peder, for you, if I understood what you're saying, Greenland is seeking to grow in any number of ways, to take on new roles, especially internationally, and also to have even greater control over what happens in Greenland itself. All that requires people, and that's one thing that Greenland has in short supply. How do you deal with the human resource problems of wanting to grow with a very small population?
Yeah, and that's a challenge that I think we also sometimes share with Iceland as well. And so many of the unskilled labor in Greenland is now from Philippine immigrants who come and do a lot of the service industry jobs, and many of the higher educated Greenlanders, end up working for the government of Greenland or in the private sector. Because what you need to be part of all those organizations is someone to kind of sit down and, write up an agreement or investigate or go to meetings. And with the increasing attention to the Arctic, there are more and more of those types of meetings. And so what the government of Greenland is kind of hoping to do is, because they know that there are many highly educated Greenlanders in Denmark. There are about 20, it depends on how you count, but about 20,000 more Greenlanders in Denmark. So in theory, we could be almost 80,000 people. But they need to be attracted home, because some of the challenges we have is, housing, because each city is basically an island type city, because there is no connection between any of the cities, so each city kind of functions as an island, and it's limited how many houses you can build, how fast, and some of the industry jobs are in smaller places where there might not be a lot of offers, and so it's a challenge to attract people home, and that's what politicians are working on.
Okay. So now I would like to open it up to questions from the audience, both here in the room and online. If you have a question online, you can send it in. Our very own Liz Hanlon will forward them to me. Sir, I think you were first, and then you'll be next, okay? Please.
My name is Juan Carlos. I have a question. Communities are so important in all the countries, in Greenland and Iceland. A lot of things in common. How is it possible that both communities, can work together? Maybe sustainable fishing, or another kind of industry. They are collaborating each other or innovating each other?
Yeah. Well, excellent question. So yes, there has actually traditionally been a lot of collaboration, from farming. We even have some Icelandic sheep. I'm from a sheep farm in the southeast. So even from agriculture over to energy, most of the hydropower plants that have been developed in Greenland are a collaboration between Greenland and Icelandic energy companies. We see the same happening now in tourism. We've had collaboration in terms of education and fisheries. Obviously, there's a strong bond there. The question for the future is maybe how to grow our collaboration. And that's, in my opinion, where, policy and politics need to play a role. We need to make sure that there's funding for projects that can be cultivated. And I would say we really need to focus on the younger generation. And I say that from an experience. I participated in my first kind of Iceland-Greenland project when I was like 20 or something. That lady turned out later to work with me when we were founding the Arctic Initiative. She became the Minister for Education and Culture in Greenland. And we had known each other for, 15, 20 years. So focusing on the next generation and really investing there is something that I think is going to be important for our relationship and for both of our countries.
Yeah, and Iceland is the first country since to open a consulate in Greenland after Greenland became a more autonomous country, even many years before the US did in 2020. So, and Greenland has also opened a representation in Iceland, and it is one of the it is the only representation that kind of has its own building. So it functions more like an embassy than any of the others who are part of the Danish embassy. We have one in Washington, which is part of the Danish embassy in Washington, and one in Brussels, and one in Beijing, all part of the Danish embassy, except in Iceland, where the Greenlandic office is its own, it has its own entrance and building, and it's very symbolic as well for Greenland. So there is a close connection and a lot of the healthcare cooperation also with Iceland. Iceland has excellent healthcare, so a lot of Greenlanders who need some special treatment, they will go to Iceland and sometimes to Copenhagen.
Okay, sir.
Thank you both. My name's Luke. It's really interesting to hear your perspectives. I'm a big fan of the show Blonde, so this question is framed around Greenland, but I think it's also very relevant to Iceland as well. In the most recent season, the Chinese are playing a very active role in Greenland economically. I find it interesting that they call themselves a near Arctic country. I'm not sure what that means. I think America could also be a near Amazonian country by that definition. So I'm wondering how, as small players, you've had to, for decades, deal with the US and Russia, but now with a new country entering the area that doesn't have any geography in the region, how is that playing into the way you think about your foreign policy going forward?
For the government of Greenland, so I won't speak for the government because I'm not part of the government anymore, but what has happened is that with the increased focus of the US on the Arctic, starting in around 2019, when then Secretary Mike Pompeo gave a speech at Rovaniemi, and then first time Trump tried to buy Greenland, the attention to Greenland has been massive, but it has also resulted in that Chinese activities have mellowed down because now the US is kind of there as a player trying to keep China out, and so a lot of the activities with the Chinese in Greenland was around 2012, 2013, and hasn't really resulted in anything. So for Greenland, right now, the focus is on the EU, the UK, and the US still. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to add to it, this definition, China being a near Arctic state, it's from the One Belt, One Road kind of initiative or work of kind of China's strategy of building infrastructure around the globe. And it has been an observer within the Arctic Council. I will say that, you know, Chinese investments in Iceland is kind of to some extent, some similar patterns that were interested in buying land, potentially related to resources like water resources, but these projects have not materialized as was in the pipelines at that time. And even though Iceland, you know, works with China on many fronts, and I think, you know, the current security situation, as we see it in Europe, has really strengthened the European collaboration and also, you know, made it more tangible for us to think about the security relationship that both of us have had for a long time through the bases that the US used to have in Iceland and still has in Greenland.
Okay, we have at least one question from online. Let's hear that next, and then you'll go after that. Okay, sir?
We've got a kind of a spicy question. So during the seminar, you've drawn a lot of parallels, highlighted a lot of places where Greenland and Iceland's interests are in alignment. Are there areas where the political and economic interests of your respective countries are not in alignment or even competing with each other? And if so, how are Iceland and Greenland navigating that?
Well, I would say Iceland and Greenland have been extremely collaborative on all of these fronts. I would say that there are areas where Greenland has many more opportunities when it comes to mining. The opportunities are great in that area. It's not a strategic competition. Greenland has a lot of players engaged in different mining operations from across the globe, so I wouldn't see that as a particular strategic competition. So maybe this is very mellow, but it's a lot of, it's much more focused on collaboration and competition. And I think this common past of having, both been non-independent countries, we are collaborating also in areas like culture, language conservation. So I would say that our heart is mainly there.
And I can kind of add to it as well, because I was the secretary for the first meeting of the Greenlandic Constitutional Commission. And one of the first things they wanted to do was visit Iceland, because after the financial crisis, there was a big process of a constitutional commission in Iceland trying to change the Icelandic constitution. And we were at a meeting with the chairman of the Greenlandic Commission, met with the Icelandic president, and both of them speak excellent Danish, but they chose to speak in English because acknowledging, the Danish is the colonial language. So there is a lot of bond on that, but one area where there is maybe not disagreement with competition is around fisheries. There is, but all of those fisheries agreements in the North Atlantic, they're very, the meetings are not spicy or anything they're just negotiations, and there hasn't been any major disagreements on, except when the Faroese started to fish mackerel, then the EU got angry, but none of the North Atlantic countries got angry. But
so this question's too good to let go. I need to ask. There is at least one obvious difference between the two countries, if we can use that word, that you haven't mentioned, and that's ethnically, right? If I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, Hans Peter, but a majority of people in Greenland are actually Inuit. That's not true of Iceland. And that leads to differences in language and culture and family relationships, say with people in North America. Doesn't that create some differences or even divergences between the two? Or no, you work through all that?
No, I don't think it creates, it's not an area of contention, because Icelandic language is also a small language where with a lot of efforts to protect the language. So, for example, the Greenlandic Language Secretariat travel a lot to Iceland to learn about the scholarly work in preserving language. And I know Iceland has big literature. I think if you ever go to Iceland, buy some of the crime novels they have. They're pretty good, even though there's basically no crime in Iceland. They have very good novelists. So there is really no content, because Iceland, better than maybe some of the European counterparts, have been very good at understanding the position of indigenous peoples and in general respect, what it means to be a colonized people, and where, sometimes, in Europe, they think of colonialism as something historic, something that happened, back when, King Leopold conquered and abused Congo and stuff like that. But colonialism happened like in the lifetimes of people in Greenland. So it's a living memory, and to some extent, some of the systemic things are still happening. So, and Iceland has a good understanding of that and never kind of try to downplay that. And Greenland looks to Iceland as a model of how you can be a sovereign country, even though you might not have a military. When you mentioned Annie Lone, the former minister, I also was a public servant under her. We went to Keflavik Airport to visit the Icelandic NATO mission there, which is led by Iceland. It used to be a U.S. military base, but the U.S. left it in 2008, and then it became an Icelandic responsibility. Yeah.
So we had, I'm sorry.
Maybe just to add to, it's true, ethnically, we origin from the Vikings, and so we don't share that in common. But as was said, it's all these cultural kind of the story of being fighting for your independence. But I will though say that, of course, even though Iceland was also a colony of Denmark, and we had our disputes at the time, and you know, we're still kind of, you can't, if you watch a football match when we're competing with the Danes, the whole country goes crazy, you know. But the story, the colonial story, is full of many more tragedies in Denmark, I would say. So, you know, complex issues to resolve on that front as well.
Thank you. We had a question from back there and then one up front. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Michael Carlos, Center for International Affairs. I have two questions actually. One probably more to Halla regarding Iceland. You mentioned in your presentation the security challenges in this topic I'd like to go back to. And I wanted to ask, how do you see Iceland's membership in NATO for the future? I mean, NATO is also undergoing transformation, given the challenges, especially from Russian neighbor. A lot is going on inside the alliance. How is Iceland see these issues and its membership? The second question probably to both of you. Recently, especially in Baltics, but I'm pretty sure in other areas, there's a growing threat coming from a shadow fleet of the dilapidated tankers carrying oil and other issues from Russia elsewhere. Do you see it also from your side, from Greenland, from Iceland, as a threat in the areas next to your coasts?
Thank you. Who wants to start?
Well, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about the security, because we had a conference yesterday where we talked about like security threats in the Arctic, and like if you kind of divide the Arctic into different things, you have the Nordics with Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and to some extent Baltic and Denmark, that has an entirely different threat level and a lot more hybrid warfare going on there than there are in Iceland or Greenland or the North American Arctic. There is the activities that you might be able to find is cyber threats more likely in because operations around and in the North Atlantic are difficult and expensive, and it's very far away. So it's not really an arena for the shadow fleet in that way.
Yeah, I can just echo that and say, you know, Iceland has been very much focused on increasing collaboration, you know, between the Nordic countries when it comes to security issues, especially after Finland and Sweden became a part of NATO. So there's a strong collaboration within NATO between the Nordic countries as well. Of course, collaboration with the US is a very important part of our security and has historically been a very important part of our security. So strengthening that collaboration is also very important for Iceland. In terms of security challenges, you know, we have the fact that we are, you know, an island, so data links are something that we are looking at. Satellite connections, if the data links go out, you know, making sure that we have the capacity to observe submarine traffic. These are all of examples of the work that is being done, but security is definitely much higher on the agenda. And I can say, because I was before working on energy, and that very much related to climate issues, and now I'm in Parliament, you can just see how the pendulum has shifted, you know, from climate and energy over to security, and how high that is on the agenda everywhere in Europe now.
I would just add that the shadow fleet you're talking about is much more of a concern on the other side of Russia. The substandard vessels coming out of Russia, oil tankers, even some container ships, pass mostly through the Bering Strait, heading down south to Asia. And were there to be some sort of accident, other casualty, the concern, of course, is that that would have effects in North America, particularly in Alaska. I think you're next.
Sure. Hi, I'm Belina Prishina, MPP1 here. Just to build on that, do you foresee any domestic issues becoming more prevalent or more at face with the rise of these security implications? I'm also thinking ports. Is there any, what's the current standing domestically?
Well, I would say, we are increasing dramatically our spending to security issues. And we're mostly using that spending to improve ports, to improve infrastructure that can have kind of like a dual use. So it's helping us to prepare, but it also helps for the fishing industry and for daily lives of Icelanders, if you will. And then Iceland has recently signed a collaboration agreement with the EU on kind of security collaboration. And we have been participating in more exercises, as has Greenland. There are more exercises taking place in both of our locations to prepare for potential conflict. But of course, we hope that that will not be the situation.
Yeah, and in Greenland, around 2018, the Danish Ministry of Defense said they would spend 1.5 billion Danish kroner more on surveillance capabilities in the Arctic. And then 22 happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, and it was around that time that the Danish budget agreement expired, so then the negotiations were going to begin, and Greenland became part of those negotiations. So the government of Greenland is, for the first time, actively participating in the Danish Parliament's defense budget negotiations, and they have, and the way they kind of structured it is that they make part agreements. So they have larger political lines they have agreed on, but they agree on packages. And in January this year, and you cannot kind of guess why January this year, the Danish Parliament, together with the government of Greenland, agreed on increased spending in the Arctic and the North Atlantic. And Greenland is very much part of those discussions, but most of it is geared towards surveillance and domain awareness, not so much defensive capabilities. But there are exercises, and there have been exercises for a while, both with the US, but also now increasingly with NATO allies. Like one of the major ones have been with the capability of NORAD to operationalize fighter jets to Greenland. That exercises were called Amalgam Dart. You can kind of Google it and see US fighter jets at Bidufik Space Base. So for Greenland, there is, because that's kind of what my research is also about, like what is the perception of Greenlandic politicians of what is the threat and what is the security picture. And a lot of it is based on kinetic warfare. But if you kind of look at the intelligence agencies' threat assessments and you talk to military professionals, no one is suspecting a kinetic warfare in the Arctic where Greenland is, and so that is more, so kind of publicly there is more fear, but technically there is less, there is no increase in threat levels.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm going to reserve time for a question from me at the end, but please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Vijay, and my question is a bit more kind of almost conceptual or abstract about sovereignty and how you think about sovereignty as a small economy where you depend on collaboration, not just for the economy and economic diversification, but also for security as well. So how do you think about your sovereignty in the context of international cooperation, which is also necessary?
I love that question.
Great question. I wanted to add to this, your question on military kind of collaboration. And of course, Iceland being a country without an army, we have and do contribute with experts, doctors. That's kind of our soft power, energy collaboration. That's how we have approached collaboration in the world when it comes to security issues, or security contributions. But your question, so I would say that, there's we have in Iceland, we have had one Nobel Prize winner, and he wrote a novel called Independent People. So I would say Icelanders are very much thinking about, being independent. But what does it mean to be independent? What does it mean to be a sovereign state? And the way that Iceland has approached it is that one of the privileges and one of the strengths of being independent is that you can participate in international collaboration. You can make agreements with different countries to strengthen your position and increase the opportunities of your people. So that's why we are part of the EEA agreement with the EU. That's why we have defense agreement with the US. That's why we're a founding member of NATO. That's why we work actively within the UN and other international organizations, because that's one of the privileges of being sovereign countries, that you can help shape the world, but you can also enlarge your scope and increase the opportunity of your people through collaboration. So that is kind of my take on this. It's making sure that we take good care of our people, but a part of that is creating opportunities through collaboration in the world.
Yeah, and before I forget, with Iceland not having an army, but they have fought a war against the UK. It's the Cod War.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can
look it up.
Look it up. It's a good story.
We won.
Yeah. Yes. But sovereignty in Greenlandic, when you listen to Greenlandic politicians talk about it, they use different words to talk about the same thing. They talk about which is like full self-determination, or which is to become a state. But when they have the discussions, that they're talking about being able to make their own decisions. And I think for when you're colonized people, a lot of your agency is taken away. A lot of people experience not being able to have autonomy over their own bodies, even with, I don't know if you've seen with there have been histories of forced relocation as well, and forced adoption. There's a lot of where your autonomy is taken away, your ability to make your own decisions. So for Greenlander politicians, when they talk about sovereignty, about statehood, that's what often they mean. It's not about self-sustainment. There is basically no country that is, self-sustaining. Everyone is dependent on others, but you enter those dependencies, with consent, by your own decision, and that makes you, sovereign over your own country.
So if I can just follow up on that, Hans-Peter, for you in particular. As I understand it, the public opinion polls in Greenland suggest that a fairly large majority of people want full independence from Denmark, or at least the functional equivalent of that. And yet Greenland remains dependent each year on a significant cash inflow from Copenhagen. What's your own sense of where this is going? If we were to have this panel discussion in 10 years, 20 years, what would that look like?
I think once I used to joke about with the former Arctic ambassador Thomas Winkler, when he talked about, why should Denmark continue to pay Greenland after independence, because that was some of the politicians were talking about, with a free association or some sort of negotiated agreement that Denmark will continue to supply Greenland with a base income. And he would ask me why. He said that's what it costs to be a member of the Arctic Council. So I think, because one of the big examples, before the Arctic Council and the Arctic became this big big brand as it is now. It's about 10 years ago or something when there was a Arctic Council meeting in Moscow, no, in Alaska or something. It must be 10 years ago during the U.S. chairship. There was a meeting in Alaska at the same time as there was a big Arctic conference in Moscow. So the way they did it, the Greenlandic minister went to Alaska, and then the Danish minister went to Moscow and had a face-to-face with Lavrov. Like a tiny country like Denmark will not have a face-to-face with Lavrov unless they're part of the Arctic. So I think, when you are honest about what Denmark gets out of having a relationship with Greenland, you can kind of see, the money that Denmark gives to Greenland is the equivalent, kind of the same as the money they gave to the national TV in Denmark. So it's like Denmark is a very rich country, and they have been holding this money, that's not even a blip in the Danish budget as some sort of weapon to undermine Greenlandic discussions.
Okay, well, we're at time. Should we be wrapping this up, Liz? I'm sorry. Those of you who may have follow-up questions, I encourage you to talk to Halla Hrund Peder offline. For now, though, please join with me in thanking them for excellent presentations. And to all of you for showing up. And Liz, thanks very much.